Hi, everyone. Thanks for being with us late in the day. We're happy to be here. Really excited about the topic that we're going to discuss for the next 30 minutes. Besides AI being the most popular topic, I think retail data and retail media is the next most popular topic out there that is moving incredibly fast. There was a lot of education needed in how to understand it. And there is no one better than to talk about that than the brands and agency partners we have up here today. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and then we'll pivot to the conversation.
Hello, I'm Lauren Lavin. I lead commerce at GroupM.
Hi, Amy Adams. I lead our media COE practice and sponsorships at Discover Financial Services.
And I'm Katie Neal, and I lead Connected Commerce Media Investments for Coca-Cola North America.
So when we were doing a lot of prep for this panel, and I was doing a lot of prep for this conversation today, of course I turned to ChatGPT, because doesn't everyone, when you're thinking about how to set up the stage for a conversation. And when you type in retail data versus retail media, you get a very traditional and what I would say is not necessarily happening today definition. So ChatGPT thinks that retail data is retail transactions, customer behavior, inventory levels, sales performance, and marketing trends. And the use cases of it are for inventory management, sales forecasting, customer insights, and operational efficiency by a retailer. Retail media, on the other hand, is advertising and promotional activities that occur within the retail environment, often on digital platforms, e-com sites, or in physical stores. And the uses is to allow brands to reach consumers at the point of sale or browsing and leveraging data for audiences. So I would think that that is very much what has happened in the past. And so what we're going to do today is really talk about what's happening today and allows these brands to really tell you how they're using retail data. So I'd love first to ask you, Lauren, in that world of retail data versus retail media, how do you define those two things, and how do you advise your brands on how to use one over the other or how they intersect in the changing landscape today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that we've advanced a little bit from that definition. So retail data is those things. It is obviously the data that is collected at retailers, and there is a lot of product and purchase information, but there's also a ton being collected right on the consumer and on their purchase journey. And then, of course, obviously what that's being tracked on is the online activities of those consumers. So when you are researching online, when you are looking online, all of that data is being collected there. Loyalty cards is another way that a lot of that consumer information is obviously being collected. And then in store, there's numerous ways that we're collecting information on purchase behavior of consumers in stores. And a lot of that data is very useful for both, for a lot of brands for a lot of different reasons. And so retail data is generally used by all retail media networks today, but not all retail data has to be through a retail media network. And so those two things do live separately at this point in time and are able to be used by different brands for different reasons. And so the way that, and I think we'll go into this in a little bit, but depending on your brand and what you're trying to do, sometimes it makes a lot of sense to use retail media, right? It is advertising that is on a site that can be used, right, for search functionality or on-site display, but it's beyond that, right, at this point, especially over the last few years. It's gone much more to be off-site. It's a lot of programmatic, it's audio, it's CTV, it's all of those different things. And the ability to really be able to target people is through that retail data. And so sometimes it makes sense to use retail media networks. If you're a brand that's selling at a retailer, what you really want is sort of to be able to target, activate, and measure through that retail. And so it makes a lot of sense to use retail media specifically to be able to do that through that sort of ecosystem that is buying media through a retailer. But then for other reasons, it makes sense for other brands to be using retail data really to be looking for those signals about those consumers, to be able to find those audiences and those people that we are looking for in an addressable way. And so it depends on sort of what your objective is as a business and what your campaign is trying to do. Different reasons for doing both. There are times when retailers don't allow you to get to their retail data without the retail media network, right? And so that inventory and that data has to be coupled together for you to be able to access it. So a lot of times that sort of is the decision as to why you would use a retail media network and not retail data. But sometimes you can have ways of getting to it, like through the trade desk, where you don't need to do that necessarily.
I wanted to just key into a word you used about the signal of the retail data. So I think many of you might be surprised that we have a non-endemic brand on the stage, and how is someone like a non-endemic brand using retail data? And so, Amy, I'd love to just ask you, how is Discover using, as a non-endemic brand, how are they using retail data? And as we were prepping for this, Amy actually brought a very interesting term that I was not aware of, that Discover is really trying to define themselves as a semi-endemic brand. So can you tell us a little bit more about why you think that and how you're using the retail data today?
Yeah, we say semi-endemic or an endemic, non-endemic if we're actually talking to the retailers, because we're imploring them to consider allowing us to advertise on their networks, because certainly shoppers can't shop without a swipe of a card. And so for us, we're just very closely in. But I would say even for non-endemics, this is such a rich data set. So prior to this, I was at McDonald's. You might not think McDonald's would be all over a retail media network either, but all the buzz right now, to your point, other than AI and Gen AI, is really around retail data and retail media networks. And so all brands, non-endemic ones included, or semi ones like us, are constantly thinking about, like, well, how should I be using this data in this rich data set? And could I find audiences or signals that are very high fidelity and accurate in a way that I could then target in a more meaningful way than other third-party data, frankly, right? And so I think more and more brands, and that's why you're still seeing the growth rates that you are in this landscape overall, because eventually CPGs will tap out as the trade and shopper dollars stay consistent and can only go so far. So I think all the networks are going to have to start looking at non-endemics more so and identifying those opportunities. For our marketing plans, we think about it in a lot of different ways. We certainly are working, with the trade desk, and I think we're one of the first kind of in our category, or leaning in as much as we are. But the way we think about it and the way we say, not just that, we're swiping a card and it's endemic like that, but we also have, one of our primary benefits is offering our customers 5% cash back in certain rotating categories every quarter. Inherently, those are retailers primarily, whether it's a home improvement one or, right now it's Target and Amazon. And so how do we identify the shoppers that over-index against shopping at said retailer or place in that moment, in that quarter? One, to go after prospects for sure, for future top-of-mind consideration to acquire for a new card, to show how relevant we are for them as a shopper, but also for our card members so that we're top of mind and top of wallet. So, and then ideally, we get into the network eventually and actually are there in the moment of purchase as well.
She's being humble. Discover has leaned very deeply in, and they've been a leader in how they're using different retail data for different audience-first strategies. And so it's been really interesting to have that conversation. I think the other thing we talk a lot about is you're in a regulated industry. And so the value of that signal and understanding exactly where that data is coming from and the level of that data and the value of that and quality of that signal becomes really important, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, super, super important in a regulated industry. This data is not modeled. And so once we start using the word models or modeling with our, fair banking compliance teams, it's just a red flag of, requiring months and months of due diligence to figure out, can we use this data or how it's being, combined with other data sets. So it actually makes it much more seamless for us to kind of build the audience set and get live in a quicker way. And I do think there's still value in modeling for sure, and taking this data set, unifying it with our other data sets, and then thinking about how to round it out. But it makes it a much more seamless activation. And I think with you all, it's even more seamless because you can buy across retailers too, versus feeling like in a scalable way, versus going, network to network to network.
And for those that are unfamiliar with what the Trade Desk is doing and how we're working with retailers, it is truly to bring SKU level transaction data from each retailer into the Trade Desk DSP and allow brands, endemic, semi-endemic, non-endemic, to have access to use that as a high quality signal to build their audiences from. And so we don't believe that that's the only signal you should use, right? First party data is going to be your best signal, second party data. And then you start to layer on your third-party data or your other things that really scale and round out your audience. But starting with the most quality signal you can in everything you do from an audience is truly the best way to do it, right? And so when we give the optionality to say, okay, I have, as a brand like Coke, I've got 20 retailers I have to win at, and I can't continue to support 20 retail media networks in the way that they want. So I'm going to support them, my top 5 in this way, but then I still have 15 others that I need a relationship with, because you need brands you need your product on store. So that's really what's happening, is having the optionality to be able to support more retail media networks, and retailers see the option to be able to work with brands, both non-endemic, but also to tap into more dollars than just the shopper dollars. So as the endemic brand here, who of course sells product everywhere all over the globe, can you talk a little bit about how you are using retail data and how that either intersects or is different than your traditional top of funnel brand strategies?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that like most brands, we have been along for the ride as these retail media networks have been stood up, and they'll come to us in a JBP conversation and say, hey, we're monetizing our first party data. Would like you to invest this much money to sell your brands at X retailer, right? And so we went along with that journey for a while. And then exactly what you had said, you're getting to 20, 30, 40 retail media networks. Met this week with Follett's Bookstore on college campuses, monetizing that first party data on college students for a retail media network. So not everyone is built the same, right? Obviously, there's those that have the most amazing audiences and really know and harness the power of that purchase data. So knowing what Trade Desk had pulled together this year, we actually did a pretty big experiment of where we could kind of converge affinity-based audience buying and planning with purchase-based signals from retail media networks. And so we went in and said, against a portfolio of our brands, so think like a Coke and a Smart Water and a Gold Peak. Now that we know that Amy's household loves these 3 brands, but Lauren's household buys 3 different brands, we were able to build so many different audiences based on data from Walmart, from Target, from a variety of different players, and come up with segments of audience, and equally come up with messages to send them in a very hyper-personalized way. And the power of this is the from to, if you will, is that previously I would have had to done a buy with Walmart Connect, a buy with Roundel for Target, a buy with Kroger Precision Marketing. Now, through the power of this data licensing agreement through the Trade Desk, we're running it through, because Trade Desk knows who loves Coke, who responds to our ads when we build day in and day out for our media. Now, lighting that on fire with purchase behavior and then content specifically customized to you. We've just seen great success with this. So it's really a convergence of the areas that's led by the power of the retail data that's available.
And one of the things we're always trying to help brands and advise brands on is like, how do you think about connecting what you're doing online from a marketing perspective to what's happening to get at the end of the purchase in store? And so as you start to do that, do you have examples of where you've seen a lot of success of when you're using this data in that way that you just described, that you're creating sales lift in store or opportunity and the KPIs are increasing in the way you wanted?
We do. I think Walmart's doing a really good job. They've launched a couple of years ago their Illuminate data spine, if you will. And so we're actually able to see if we launch a program and say we start with something in store and you get a blip on sales and then you light it up with media a couple weeks later, we can bring those sources of data together through the tools that they have available, like we've really never been able to do before, right? I always say that, look, we work with a lot of media partners. I've never received a negative ROAS rep report from anybody, ever. But the reality is, for us, it's about driving more transactions, and that's sales, right? And so how do you have that impact? Because it's not just about a last touch of a banner ad that you saw. It's about the ecosystem of everything we do to develop the brands that people love, The day in and day out affinity-based things that we create, but then when you're ready to buy, sending them the signal, whether they're in store to put it in their cart or online.
How do you think, Amy, about how you use that signal that we talked about to think about your different lines of businesses, right? So it's a little bit more easy to say we're going to take someone through the entire journey, but do you see a world where there's a value in the level of a retail signal to help you connect different lines of business?
Yeah, probably. So at Discover, we are a fairly siloed organization, as many have silos somewhere in their organization, but we've got a number of different lines of business. We have credit card, our deposits checking business, home loans, personal loans, and a couple others. But if you think about even home loans as a perfect example, those teams really are focused on really lower funnel performance acquisition efforts. They don't control kind of the brand spend that lives on my team to help drive the awareness, initial consideration, send them a warm handoff, we say, and let them convert at a more efficient rate. And so for retail data, a perfect example would be home loans. And as we look at home improvement retailers even, and how do you think about, Home Depot and Lowe's specifically, those kinds of retailers and using those kinds of networks, again, that's another very endemic, semi-endemic alignment. Right. Alignment.
I like that new term.
But if we can identify the audiences when they are indicating and identifying the retail signals that they might be coming into a home loan journey or, very much, spending more on the DIY projects that are becoming more expensive in those retailers with a brand touch multiple times before we send them to them to then convert in the same environment. And so how do you spend both dollars in one ecosystem, even though they look like two campaigns right now? But if we can get the retail media networks to think about it as one campaign and we set it up correctly, then you can see across both.
I love that. How at GroupM are you having to adapt as an agency to think about this ever-changing landscape? I mean, AI is another one, right? But as you think about retail data and advise your clients on when to use what you were talking about before, a retail media network, or to think about a different strategy that maybe hasn't been thought about before?
Yeah, I think it all depends. Again, it's all sort of going to an audience-first strategy, no matter if you're an endemic brand or a non-endemic brand. And so it's just different, again, depending on what you're trying to do and what your objective is. And so I think, the audiences and the signals are just used in a different way. And so if you think about some of the endemic brands that are selling at these retailers, they're looking for signals that are allowing them to grow market share. And so they're looking for ways to conquest competitors. They're looking to find new customers. They're looking for people that have browsed and abandoned. And so there's different, more granular ways of using sort of those data signals to be able to target and grow your business there. But then they're also looking for ways that matches up with the non-endemic space, right, which is to grow awareness and to make sure that you have the right customer in mind and as a business sort of who you're trying to go after, and being able to go and find those signals to get those audiences and in a highly targeted, highly addressable way is very important. And so it just depends on sort of knowing what you are trying to do at the outset and going and sort of looking through that data and mining it for exactly how you want to make sure that you're moving customers along through that purchase journey.
I love that. I mean, I think we're talking about a lot of things that probably for many of you sound really exciting to execute, right? But you're probably sitting there going, well, how do I actually make that happen inside my walls? Because that's a very different orchestration process of bringing different brand budgets together or trying to break down silos. And so, Katie, can you talk for a minute just about it's a little bit of a two-part question of what are you doing internally to be able to execute what you talked about? And then what are you asking of your retail partners and challenging them to do differently to be able to do the things that we're talking about up here today?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you are looking to bring more traditional brand or commerce and media together, you have to have a North Star of what that actually is about. And so for us, it's really around recruiting people to drink more Coke products more often. And we were all behind this idea of bringing affinity, legacy media planning together with purchase base infused. So for us, it was bringing together key stakeholders. I actually co-lead an entire initiative with our head of brand media. So we don't make a move without each other anymore. And while our remits are similar, they're actually complementary through this process, because the affinity brand side is not used to the power of what comes with purchase-based data sets and the variety of different places where you can get that, whether it's from an NCS or from a Walmart or an Uber. And on the commerce media side, we could lean more heavily into the affinity piece. So this convergence is a really strong way, but it took putting the leads of two areas that typically worked independent from each other and putting us in charge of an initiative. We also fueled that to say this is going to be a year of experiment, so let's figure it out. So we've run dozens of experiments with a variety of different data sets, with a variety of different media partners. And from that, we're finding what are key insights that are transforming the way we do media at the Coca-Cola Company in a business as usual type way. So as we go into 2025, our challenge to our media agencies, to our traditional media partners, to our retail media partners is saying, this is the new way that Coca-Cola is doing it. So to retail media partners, the agility for that they have for their data, their retail data, to be used with partners like the Trade Desk, like a Meta, where you're seeing very innovative thought leaders in those organizations realizing that if you play the short game of saying you must only invest in my retail media network in my managed service way, that's not playing the long game in this area. The long game is saying we're going to monetize and be agile. What's the most valuable piece of retail media, which is that purchase data. And let's be along for the journey with brands who are willing to experiment and see where it drives growth. For us, those are long-term partners that I'm more interested in engaging with.
I love that. And Amy, as a leader in the space of really leaning into the signal that retail data gives you as a semi-endemic, what are you challenging those retailers? Because that's a bigger hurdle, right? To say, like, look at us in a different way. But what are you challenging them to do in the next few years to try and think more broadly beyond just the partners they work with that have brands on shelf?
Well, I mean, of course, I will say, again, opening up their platforms for sure, number one, because there's just so much growth opportunity, I think, for them. And I understand why they have kept it closed, because they want to make sure they keep their own endemic customer experience to what it is meant to be. But I think as they open that up, they're going to start to see a whole new growth engine of opportunity there. And for us, from a payment standpoint, we want to provision our card in there. And we're talking to some very big ones and big players around, one, we've done it with one big player, the biggest out there, of course. But the other big players that we're talking to, it's like if we can get them to understand a broader strategic partnership, like beyond a media JBP, but a corporate JBP opportunity, it's much even bigger for us. The second thing is we have launched a clean room. And, I like to call them the community clean rooms that are more open to connecting in. So as retail media starts to connect into, the clean room environments versus their own walled clean room, that's the other thing that we're talking about. Because eventually all this data is going to live out there and we're going to all be acting on it. They're going to drive growth through it. But we're not going to be able to deliver any meaningful results to be able to articulate the value of it without a unified data set in a clean room to be able to show that. So even if we can have a few of them in the same environment with us, it will go a long way, I think. Going beyond engagement rates for us, you can look at return on ad sales. For us, we're currently just looking at, kind of typical media metrics, trying to get them into market mix modeling. But a clean room ultimately will allow us to get a unified reach. Where can I actually find the right audience at most effectively? And until then, or even frequency, basic metrics. Until then, it's hard to show the value of it beyond what it currently is.
You said something that I think is really important and something I'm really excited about for the next kind of 3 to 5 years with retail data is just moving beyond media. So really thinking about having strategic partnerships in multiple ways and bigger ways, right? So between someone like a DSP and a brand and a retailer. We talk a lot with our CPG brands about if you have a JBP with us and you have a JBP with your retailer, when you spend and use your retail data on the Trade Desk, you now have a win-win-win because you're spending against everything and you're giving commitments to 3 different JBPs. And so really, how do you transcend beyond the media metrics into what is this strategic partnership doing, and how are we understanding where our consumer is through the value of using retail data? So I think we're in such a nascent place, but I think there's so much more conversation that we can have around it. But let's start. I'd love to ask all 3 of you kind of what is exciting about retail data in the next 3 to 5 years as we look forward, and we'll kind of see if there's anything else to wrap up.
What would be exciting for me and what I hope happens is sort of that defragmentation of where we're at today. I don't think it's super sustainable to have brands be spending on 40 different siloed retail media networks. And so, we're starting to see like cracks in the system at this point. And so I think that in the next 3 to 5 years, there will be some consolidation that happens, and it will be needed for us to be able to sustain and grow, right? If the spend needs to grow, we will need to break down some of those silos. And I really think that, again, we're seeing it now, but the retail data, the convergence of what is traditionally national media versus what is commerce media is probably the thing that's, I would say this year started collapsing the most. And I think that will just continue to collapse. And so we'll need the ability and the transparency to be able to see across, sort of the whole media mix and be able to, again, I think that if retailers sort of what they were saying understood that if they were playing the long game, as Katie said, and they made it as transparent as possible, the trust is there and money follows sort of the trust in the system. And so I think that as, what usually happens is like 1 or 2 players sort of take the lead and then everyone follows along. And so I think that we'll see that probably in the next couple of years, and hopefully all of our lives will get a little bit easier on the day-to-day.
Well, one of the things that we've been hearing a lot of from our brands, and I think you had this conversation with my colleague, Katie, is just about starting to think of your dollars as a dollar. It's a dollar. It's not a trade dollar. It's not a shopper dollar versus a brand dollar. A dollar is a dollar that I want to spend most effectively to find my consumer, to sell more product, or to have more transactions and acquisitions. And that's really a transformation of what all brands have been doing for the last 50 years, and that's an evolution. But it's truly the way to think about it, is to use a dollar as a dollar and to find your audience in the most effective way across wherever you want to reach them, and to start in as wide of a place as you can to do that and learn along the way.
Yeah, I agree with that. There was, I had an aha moment over the weekend. So you can order Chick-fil-A via your Apple CarPlay now. So my kids discovered it over the weekend. And I was thinking about the power of that, right? If you're thinking about following the consumer, Mercedes is launching their latest line of cars with AI and all the things that are getting to know us through technology, right? And how it's shopping and transactions are becoming even more seamless than ever before. And so I think you're exactly right. It's a dollar, right? And so if I have a dollar to make sure every time somebody orders through Apple CarPlay, I want to make sure a Coke is part of that order, right? And if that's at the fingertips of a consumer, how I think about going after that is a little bit different than how I might think about at Dollar General, right? Or something else. So we have 2 billion transactions. People buy and drink our brands a day around the world. So we have a lot to get after, right? But where we can follow the consumer and where technology takes us at the intersection of the right moment to connect with them, to remind them that, a great brand is there for you. That's where I think the future of retail media really holds, is that moment of ease, convenience, love of brands, and then getting them to buy.
I guess on one hand, I think, we're always saying, gosh, there's so much fragmentation, and there's like another 10 that just popped up last week, right? But on the other hand, to me, that's really exciting, because I'm not even sure I know the bookstore that you talked about, but I was like, oh, that's really interesting, because
college campuses.
I have a student card that I'm trying to push, and and that's a hard data set to find in a regulated industry, actually. And so I actually think the more that comes up, the better, actually, for a while, and because I think it's going to get people to think about second-party data signals and audiences in a different way. And everybody's been, complaining about cookies, they're going away. What we're really complaining about is third-party data, and that it's just not very accurate and hasn't really done its job for the last 20 years. And so how can we all think about what the right data strategy is. Of course, with your first-party data, but where are you identifying all the right second-party data sets and how to harness that and scale it with partners, and what's your strategy around that? So what was the name of it again? The bookstore?
Follett's bookstore. They like fuel all the.
It's been too long since you've been on a college campus, Amy. No, I think that's it's so important. There's so much opportunity out there, and it really comes down to it. It always starts with what you want to do as a brand, right? What are you trying to do? What's your objective? That hasn't changed, but the signal and the opportunity and the data sets, like a second party data that you can use that you haven't had access to in the environments you're traditionally spending in before, is truly the really exciting opportunities as we move forward. So thank you so much for being a part of the conversation with us. Thanks, ladies.
Thank
Thank you.